at this church previously, and most of you know that I tend not to speak with notes. However, when we have a text as complex and complicated as that which we have today, I will probably rely on them just a little bit more so that I don't miss some of our key points in this text. Each week at my day job, my Monday through Friday, and a little extra job, I have a team meeting with other people who have similar roles in my place of employment. And each week we start with a check-in. Mind you, it's only on Tuesday of the long week that we check in together. And typically it's something along the line of a number, 1 to 10, where are we, and an emotion that we are feeling in that time. You might think by Tuesday we feel pretty good. We've shaken off the cobwebs of the Monday and we're hitting our stride on Tuesday. But more often than not, this group of well-trained and educated and experienced professionals have some sort of emotion that feels like bracing, grit, determination. We're in the midst of conflict and challenge, and what we're going to do is we are going to just dig in. We're going to get there. And it reminded me a little bit of preparing for this sermon. I've also kind of needed to dig in a little bit and to wrestle with the grace message in this text. But it reminds me of how often we as humans brace ourselves. I'm not talking about the bracing in a car that perhaps your husband drives just a little bit too fast and he puts on those brakes and you have to brace yourself. You might relate to that. But I'm talking about that emotional bracing. When you're entering into a conversation with someone and you're bracing for that harsh tone, that negative message, that lashing out. Maybe it's when you get an email and you just see the sender, you don't even see a subject line, and you brace yourself. You're already formulating in your head a response. We're kind of programmed to have that feeling, that innate sense that I need to protect myself, I need to defend myself. Sometimes I even need to lash out. We walk around and we've got comments in our heads. We've got those responses that we didn't really have the courage to say, or maybe we just weren't firing on all cylinders, so we didn't think about it in the moment. 3 hours later, we have a really great comeback for that negative interaction. We walk around with speeches in our heads that we never actually say, but we're ready. We're ready to go. We're scrappy, we're ready, we're prepared, because we live a life braced. It is our human instinct to do that. But then this text from 1 Peter interrupts that thought. And it is a tricky text. It is important for us to recognize that in this text, we squirm. When we read, be subject even to those who are harsh. If you endure pain while suffering unjustly, you have God's approval. I'd like to rush past that. Frankly, I'd like to omit that. But let's not do that. Let's stop a moment and unpack it. Because perhaps if you've ever been mistreated, if you've ever had somebody belittle you, dismiss you, talk down to you, other you, perhaps you've lived in a system where that has been your whole experience, a system that is created to treat you like you are less than. You can connect and relate to that feeling. Unfortunately, this text sometimes gets lifted up out of context, and it is used to keep people in an oppressive place, to keep people in abusive relationships, to keep people confined in a system that does not recognize the dignity in their humanity. This text has been misused and abused for generations. And so it is important for us to recognize that this is not just a holy way of saying, too bad for you, suck it up, try better next time, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. If you were good, we wouldn't have this bad. This is not the good news. And if you're ever confused about whether a text is intended to put people in a diminished position, ask yourself this: is this grace? Is this God? Because what we know is that grace is not in the harshness, it's in the healing. And when we think about where God is in this story, it is not in the punishment, it is not in the condemnation, it is not in the oppression. That grace is with God, and God's presence is there for all of us. That is the good news. It's important for us to remember that as Peter is writing this letter, he is not writing it from a position of power. Sometimes that's how we read it. We read it that he is in power and he is talking to people who are lower than him in the system. But Peter is really trying to at least speak to those who are on the margins. That early Christian community was small. They were scattered, and they needed some direction. This was the best he could come up with. We'll give him a little bit of grace too. But when he was speaking to them, he was not speaking to them from a place of power or perfection or control. He was speaking one person to another. He was speaking from within the pain. He was speaking as one who had been marginalized, one who had been removed from a place of peace. And so when we think about this, it is not spoken from outside of suffering, it's inside of it. The center of his message is this: when Jesus was abused, he did not return abuse. When Jesus suffered, he did not threaten, and by his wounds, you have been healed. You have been healed by his wounds. Not by your perfection, not because you did come up with that witty comeback ready to go, not because you were born into a certain zip code, you were not born into a certain name. It's because of Jesus you were healed. It's already there. That is the message. And yet, we could go a different direction. We could say, great, I'm healed. I'm all good. Jesus took care of it. Here I am. I don't need to do anything. This is not a call to be passive. This is a call to engage in the revolutionary practice of living a grace-filled life. It's taking that message and understanding that the life of Jesus given for us is not for us to hold or hoard or wrap up in a special package that makes it really hard for people to access it, to cover it with centuries of symbolism, of liturgy, of if this, then that. The message is already here. The love of Christ is already here. This Eastertide season, as we live into Resurrection Sunday is not just Easter, it is this whole season. We are also looking at some of the texts from Father Richard Rohr. Many of you are probably familiar with the texts that he has, and he has written extensively about grace. He says this: grace is not something that God gives us from time to time. In other words, it's not sporadic. It's not intermittent droppings of grace. It's not like when you go to a Nuggets game and they have the blimp with the t-shirts or they're throwing things. It's not just hit or miss. That grace permeates everything. He tells us that grace is the very presence of God, always flowing, always sustaining, always available. Grace is the current underneath everything. Grace is not a place you visit. It is not something that just comes here and there. It is the presence of God that we experience everywhere. connects that thought, and he shows us that even in suffering, and maybe especially in suffering, the presence of God through that current of grace is already there. It is moving. Jesus in this passage is not glorifying pain. He is saying that even in pain, he will not be defined by it. Sometimes I wonder about the early church and some of the leadership where we focus so much on the cross. I think Jesus is leading us beyond the cross into resurrected living. What does it mean that even though he has suffered, he has chosen a way to live that is filled with mercy, opportunity for redemption, restoration, and peace? Jesus shows us that violence and injustice do not have the final word. And I don't know about you, but I really need that hope. Because it feels like so many places in our world, that injustice, that violence, are overwhelming and inescapable. But to remember that Jesus tells us that that is not the final word. That does not define him, and it doesn't define us. There is a different way to be human. We don't have to tally the score. We don't have to get even. That is not our goal. Our goal is to go beyond that, to go beyond what feels like instinct, and to live a life of grace. Releasing those tally marks, releasing that score, releasing those words that you have been working on and mulling on and practicing in response to the pain that you feel. I think it's important for us to remember that it is not weakness to live a grace-filled life. It is not weak for us to show kindness to others. Most of us are really fluent in this reactivity. You hurt me, I hurt you. You shame me, I shame you. You lash out, and I get the last word. But what if we were versed and practiced, and it was our first thought was to show grace. Our first thought was to show compassion. Our first thought was to say, I'm sorry you're hurting. Our first thought was to say, I wonder what God's purpose is for this person. I wonder if that was more automatic for us. Grace interrupts the cycle of one-upmanship. Grace says, your harm does not get to decide who I become. Let me be clear. If this is a text that triggers you because you have been in a relationship where this has been a part of what's held you in harm, this text has been misused. Because really what this letter reminds us is that it's not about oppression, it's about freedom. It's about freedom even when there is pain. And that freedom is Jesus. Most of us have experienced pain in one way or another. Some of us live in that every single day. We've got a relationship, or we've got a connection, or we've got memories that keep us in a place of pain. And Jesus is telling us that the way out of that is grace. Because if we continue that cycle, if we continue to live in those places of pain, we're going to be hardened to it. It's going to be automatic for us to hurt instead of seeking healing, to separate instead of looking for ways to connect. And really this text, despite all of the language that is so really difficult, this text is really calling us to the one who is our shepherd, the one who protects us, the one who loves us, the one who heals us through his sacrifice. Grace is deeper. Grace is stronger. This is a reminder that even here, and even especially here, God is present. God is sustaining. God is already at work. That grace is here for you, each one of us, each one of you. That grace is here. Your step, your invitation is to accept it and let it transform you. Be a mirror that reflects that grace back into this world. Be a person who takes down the systems of oppression, the ways that we have othered people. Come back to the Christ who calls us to live as a healed, healthy, grace-filled people, a community that opens its doors, that walks the walk and talks the talk, and is authentically His. This day,